All right. So first, I would like to welcome, since this is a Nature of Writing series event, I would like to invite Christian Martin of the North Cascades Institute to say a few words. So welcome, Christian.
Thank you very much, Claire. Happy Earth Day to everybody out there in Zoom land. This is indeed an auspicious day to hear poems inspired by the wild and woolly natural world, written by the one and only Bill Yake this evening. Before we get started, I would like to respectfully acknowledge the Coast Salish people who have stewarded the land from where I am standing throughout the generations here in my backyard in Bellingham. And I offer this acknowledgement as a first step in honoring their relationship with the land that we share, as a call towards further learning and action, and to assist in giving them voice. Thank you. I'm here on behalf of North Cascades Institute, where I work. We are a conservation nonprofit founded in 1986 that uses education as the tool to conserve and restore the natural world. The North Cascades Institute's mission is to inspire environmental stewardship through transformative learning experiences in nature. And we offer programs for people of all ages and backgrounds to explore, enjoy, and engage with the mountains, rivers, forests, people, and wildlife of the Pacific Northwest, so that all will care for and protect this very special place. The Institute's programs include Mountain School, which is a 3-day environmental education experience for 5th graders from Skagit and Whatcom counties. Youth Leadership Adventures, which is an 8 and 12-day backpacking and canoe camping field course series that connects high school students to the natural world while engaging them in conversations about climate change and climate solutions. And we're actually currently accepting applications for high school students to join us on Youth Leadership Adventures on our website right now, actively recruiting for the next cohort. The Institute also offers a diverse suite of programs for adults and families, including field classes, family camps, art and wellness retreats, and boat tours on Diablo Lake. Most of our programs take place at the North Cascades Environmental Learning Center, which opened in 2005 on Diablo Lake in the heart of the national park, about 3 hours from Seattle, 2 from Bellingham. And now, most like everybody else, the Institute had a very challenging year in 2020. Most of our programs were canceled. The Learning Center was shut down. But this forced downtime gave us the opportunity to develop educational programs online. And we actually discovered that we could reach a broader and more diverse audience this way. So now here in 2021, we're so excited that we actually reopened the Environmental Learning Center on Diablo Lake this month and are hosting people for base camp every weekend up there. We're also going to continue to offer a great slate of our online classes as well. And right now we have more than 40 classes and programs and camps open up on our website for registration currently. Everything from digital photography to wolves in Washington to geology hikes to corvid mythology. And all of these programs can be found on our website at ncascades.org. I'll put that link in the chat here in a minute. As Claire mentioned, tonight's reading is part of our annual Nature of Writing speaker series. We host readings every spring and fall with Village Books, one of my favorite things to work on every year. And in addition to Kim Stafford, singer Come From Afar, reading next Tuesday for National Poetry Month. We'll also have Lyenda Lynn Haupt sharing her forthcoming book, Rooted, Life at the Crossroads of Science, Nature, and Spirit on May 6th. We'll be hosting Robert Michael Pyle, the one and only, the legendary Robert Michael Pyle on May 20th, sharing from his new book, Nature Matrix, which is new and selected essays. And finally, one other event that's going to be really special in the Nature Writing series is on May 13th. And this is an evening with Saul Weisberg and friends. Those friends being the journalist and author Bill Dietrich and the author and former dean of Huxley College, John Miles. So in celebration of the 35th anniversary of North Cascades Institute, as well as the impending retirement of Saul Weisberg after 35 years of leadership, this coming June, Saul, Bill, and John are going to get together on May 13th here on Village Books Zoom for a celebration, a bunch of storytelling, some reflections on how all three of them have helped to build the Institute into what it is today, as well as to share some readings from books they've written about the North Cascades, and probably tell some jokes and some adventure tales. So that's May 13th. All of the classes that we're offering, all of the family camps, boat tours, as well as these readings coming up over the next couple weeks can be found again on our website at ncascades.org. So I do hope you'll check it out. And I'm very excited and very honored to be a part of this reading tonight with Bill Yake. So thank you, and back to you, Claire.
Thank you so much, Christian. Thanks for listing all those Nature of Writing series events. We're excited for all of them. I want to say, every time you mention one, I was thinking I'm especially excited for that one. Oh, but I'm especially excited for that one too. And I'm especially excited for all of them. So it's a great series. Yeah. So thank you. Okay, so now I get to introduce our featured speaker this evening. Bill Yake has been making and publishing poems that celebrate the nature of the Pacific Northwest since the late 1960s. Born and raised in Spokane, his earliest connection to Whatcom County was in distributing and submitting a petition in high school supporting the establishment of the North Cascades National Park, 1964. He's worked lookouts, road construction, and cemeteries, fought forest fires, and during a 25-year career with Washington State's Department of Ecology, pardon me, excuse me, I don't know where that came from. Okay. Department of Ecology, as an environmental scientist and engineer, Bill diagnosed malfunctioning sewage treatment plants and tracked poisons in water, fish, and sediment. These pursuits brought him intermittently to Bellingham for source monitoring at Georgia Pacific's pulp mill, as well as routine sampling of the Whatcom waterway in the late 1970s. Paths have taken him into the mountains, the high desert, and the forests and prairies of the Puget lowlands. His writings appear widely in publications serving the environmental, scientific, and literary communities. These include Open Spaces, Orion, Rattle, Cascadia Review, and NPR's Cruel Witch Wonders. How's that for timing? His most recent book, right here, Waymaking, by Moonlight, new and selected poems from Empty Bowl Press. It includes poems from the late 1960s to the present. Everyone, join me in welcoming Bill Yake.
All right. Well, thank you very much, and welcome to you all. It's good to see the faces of those I can see the faces of. There's a number of names without faces, so I'm sure you're there behind that. And for this to be Earth Day, nonetheless, wow, I'm very honored by your presence. Thank you. Thanks much, Claire, for the introduction and all the coordination, and to North Cascades Institute and Village Books for their good work on behalf of preserving and educating us about the wild and all the special places in the Pacific Northwest. And special thanks to Empty Bowl Press, Michael Daly, especially, and to my friend Greg Darms, who's here tonight, for the beautiful design of the current book. Much appreciated. Thanks also to Christian for all the facilitation, and because you teased it, Christian, and because it's spring, here's that quick poem that you mentioned in your email. Spring. Beneath the hail, fresh rhubarb leaves, pulse and bob. So on to the main event. The themes for this reading are poems drawn from the book, a fairly small subset of all the poems there, but some of those that focus on rivers, watercourses, watersheds, a little bit of history, and finally some responses or possible responses to the losses, possibilities of repair, rending and mending, and responses to place in general. Of course, preparing for this reading got me thinking about some local history, passing of time, and links to Bellingham. it's been over 40 years now, I think, since I was leaning out of the float plane, collecting water from the Whatcom waterway. Back then, sulfite waste liquor from the pulp mill was turning the bay the color of really strong coffee. And I was told the boaters anchored their craft there in the waterway to quote unquote clean their hulls, which meant, of course, killing the barnacles, the mussels, the algae, and of course it did the same for those critters that weren't attached to the hulls. On the site itself, mercury pooled at the bottom of an unsealed lagoon. It's visible in one of these photos. That was the lagoon that returned scrubber water from the mercury cell chloralkali plant, where the chlorine was made that bleached the tissue paper that was churned out by GP. So as you can see here, things can improve. Sometimes it's very slow, but it can be done. Claire mentioned in the introduction the petition that's almost 60 years ago now about the formation of North Cascades National Park. As I understand it, the park came into being in 68, and then Village Books came into being, I think, around 1980, if the internet is accurate, and North Cascades Institute a few years later in 86. So at any rate, got a few tentative environmental links to Bellingham, and then another link through my wife, Jeanette, who got her marine biology degree at Fairhaven, and my nephew, David, who I think is here tonight, who is a principal at the local Canberra Coffee Cafe. So I feel like only a partial stranger to the area. I like to start readings by honoring the work of one of the Pacific Northwest's cadre of fine poets. And for the reading this evening, I chose Mike O'Connor, who recently left us, and his poem, "The River That Is a Deer and the Last Bird Flying," which is from The Rain Shadow, and I'm indebted to Tim McNulty, who frequently teaches at North Cascades Institute, for sending me the copy of that book, the book in which the poem appears. Mike and Tim worked the forests of the Olympic Peninsula in the 70s, planting trees, building trails. So they were planting saplings in a ravished watershed, the Clearwater. And Mike's poem seems like a good introduction to some of the themes tonight. When we were communicating about it, Tim sent along this note, which I wanted to extract a bit from. He says, "That's a beautiful poem of Mike's. Themes of ecological plunder, restoration and healing, the spiritually renewing power of nature and river running through it all, poetry of place. I remember that particular job well. Late spring, probably 75 or 76. We were planting a large clear cut on DNR land. The agency was intent on liquidating old growth then, and this was some of the last old growth spruce in the Clearwater River. I remember measuring off a spruce stump on the river bottom, 3 foot to a hodad handle. It was something over 3 handle lengths. We camped in the trees on the north side of the river. The cut extended from the river up a steep ridge to the south with a very narrow leaf strip of trees that was knocked all to hell by high lead yarding to a landing back at the north side. Pretty typical mess for those days. We crossed the river on down trees to begin our morning run up the mountain and crossed again, returning to camp in the late afternoon, drinking, swimming, cooling off in the river, then listening to its song all evening, as Mike notes. One of maybe hundreds of similar jobs in those days, but Mike's poem kept it alive for me. So that was Tim McNulty. I might say that this is the kind of anecdote that introduced and interested me in the Buddhist poet tree planters and poet fishermen of the Olympic Peninsula. Somewhere along the line, probably Port Townsend, I came across a book called Working the Woods, Working the Sea, which was a collection of accounts and stories and poems from the Olympic Peninsula. And it was my first glimpse of Empty Bowl Press. I was moved and intrigued. This image of the cover of the original. So here's Mike's poem. The river that is a deer and the last bird flying. How many days have we spent on this river, camped in green willows and sand? How many trees have we planted above it like alms to impoverished gods? It is a river shorn of great trees, ribboned seaward in clamorous light below acres of spruce stumps and dust plumes of trucks. It is the last thread in the loom, the one bird from the past still flying. The clear water, about as clear as you would ever want the weather or the world. Amber, and then around sundown, green. When we come dizzy from her slash-chalked heights, we clamber to her side like fawns to a doe, and she gives us music, swimming holes, water for our tea, something of our own clear flow. So, on to the collection, Waymaking by Moonlight, with this little epigram from the first section of the book, which is populated by short pieces, including aphorisms. And this one seemed apt. History and rain, they teach us humility. So moving to watercourses, estuaries, and whatnot. Here's an early chart of the area not far from Bellingham Bay. Imagine what life along the arms and estuaries of Puget Sound, the Salish Sea, might have been prior to the arrival of colonists, as Christian evoked. This poem is from Haida Gwaii, the current and previous name for the islands that were for a while called the Queen Charlottes, and how marine waterfronts might have been regarded in those pre-colonial days. The poem is called The Hidden. For the now abandoned villages of Haida Gwaii. Begin with our present tenuous foothold by the sea. Walk inland, and the green moss of forest will swallow and hide you. Paddle seaward, and the sky will swallow you in cloud and the village in alder smoke. The sea drags our long lines down, our halibut hooks. We have seen the straight swallow whales whole. Walk backwards, and this time will swallow you whole, tuck you out of sight behind the house skin, beneath the earth skin, turn you blue beneath the tricks played by light on water, by water doing its dance of waves crossing waves, by the flickering of candlefish. Nearby, you hear a heart you cannot see. 6 kin ravens gossip over food behind a damp sheet of mist, their voices like trip hammers striking at small wooden boxes. Specific pollens are falling on water. Years hence, they'll be keyed from layered sea muck and bog varves, cloudberry, Calder's lovage, stories awaiting decoding. All these sleights of hand, smearing winter tallow on and the char of shelf fungus on our faces, to face the sea with all its death, all death's rifts and rifts. Survive this, and by the next turning you will hail summer's fair weather woman, with sweetmeats of blue mussel roasting open by the house fire. Even ghosts linger when they catch, as they must, the scent of this rich and wistful world. And then moving somewhat forward to maybe 100 years or so ago, we have the initial development along the shoreline. And this poem came from notes that were taken while drinking coffee and sitting in a friend's float house on a small estuary near Astoria. It's called The January Float Houses of John Day Slough for Greg and Christy. A shaded, wet, and windy country where houses ride, pinned by pilings, bound by spikes, bolts, turnbuckles, and thick board chain links. Dwellings hang on the long tidal breath of this short river constrained by dikes, float in fluid, tenuous disquiet, a certain uncertainty. Flexing walkways decked in asphaltic grit run neighbor to neighbor along railed gangways strung by solstice lights. One day in clarity, one in thickening clouds, a third in iconic rain. The sky rests on slack water with windows, and windows consider the slick green tension where bluebills dive to clam and silt. Two merganser pairs, one set in rapt pursuit, the second dawdling dive. And, but for their splashy skipping launches, the coots rafted near the far bend mill in considerable mute constellations. Just beyond the rippled window glass, a neighbor runs his gill netter out through early morning rain. He's meditative, tugging at a thermos as each 27th raindrop on the river leaps to form a brief, bright, reflective hemisphere. And that often, Claire, you might want to advance a couple of images. Yes, this is the ones that associate with the last poem. Go forward. Yeah, so here are the float houses on the other John Day River near Astoria. I think there's one more image of that, like that. Yeah, there we go. And then, let's see, what's the next image? Okay, here we go. But first a poem before that. So as I was mentioning, what happened in the last 100 years is that a lot of that initial development along the estuaries and water lines got bigger and bigger and fancier, particularly in the estuaries. And this poem sort of takes a glimpse at that. It's called Remembering John Muir Climbed Tall Trees in Storms. Don't know if you've heard that story, but anyway, this was thinking about him staying at the Seattle Hilton, 1990. Fog, streetlight yellow, the color of aspirated sodium scuds up from Elliott Bay, like smoke from a forest burning. 23 stories up, room lights out, February wind. Monumental towers of glass sketched and polished and reflected light quiver. Now pretty much the only major estuary that's any resemblance of what it once was is the Nisqually, which is now a wildlife refuge. One more waterway, which you see here, the Columbia River. A more complete rundown on the history of that major waterway. An accounting for the Columbia before tubes were tied off by dams. Called the mouth of the Columbia. 200 years have washed 10,000 to the sea. We can go back to the previous image, please. Thanks. Okay, mouth of the Columbia. 200 years have washed 10,000 to the sea. Millennia of snow, bones of otters, mammoths, nets, bird arrows and feathers of birds. Ice-bound boulders larger than grand hotels. Whole trade routes washed away. Skilled women gone, children dead. A few eyes left to carry the smattered genes of the Chinook lost tribe, old photos, handwritten books. Tidal seeps, rain and slick water standing in the side channels. Eye sockets stacked in heaps, the white island Memaloose, the piles of skeletons, the eyes of birds, the fish, the salmon, the grandmothers, the restless ghosts of men. They carry stones called strength from place to place. How little has filtered through these epidemics, thefts, and endless killings. A handful of painted rocks, the Spedus owl, wild goats with back-curved horns, the counting marks, and she who watches the now ponded river at Horse Thief Park. Petroglyphs lying drowned behind the dam that drowned the Dalles, the spider work of fish scaffolds, stones that weighed the old nets down, spear points, bones, our short, uneasy sleep. Everything goes pouring through the gorge, cornucopia, mouth, and throat of the Columbia. Fresh and smoked salmon, spawners, smolts, whitefish eggs, furs, hides, blankets, travelers, language, tuberculosis, knives, wives, dentilia shells, dollars, smallpox, words, horses, dogs, feathers from Mexico, September monarchs swinging to the south, water, gray sand worn from the stone plateau, storms, months of rain, iron, seals, smelt, paddles with pointed blades, brown floodwater, whitecaps, huge waves smashing at the bar, metals, the rum and orlocks of English sailors, coppers from the Haida, beaver hats, smelly uniforms, potions, poisons, spells, and powers, sturgeons, 20 feet long, 200 years old, a ton heavy, condors, buzzards, terns, and gulls. And speaking of what rivers were, or maybe could have been, maybe still sometimes are, here's a poem for the unfettered North Fork of the Skokomish River, running and running. The Skokomish running low and cold, 3 versions. No one knows what a river is. Cobbles in moments of godlike calm, braid and twist the course, the coursing, and single threads move, faint cobalt, musing as the rippling air. No one knows what a river is. Cobble in seasons or moments of godlike calm, braids and twists the courses, the coursing threads, slightly unlike the shivering air. No one knows what a river is. About the cobble, that chilled, calm deity will braid its course, its courses, its coursing, its many single threads evolving in faint cobalt, barely reminiscent of the shivering air. So now a slight change in focus from the water courses themselves to the trees and forests that protected or sometimes still do protect the watersheds. This poem recounts some of my psychic responses in a major move from east of the mountains to the west side. This would have happened or begun in late 1977. Poem is called Entering the Forest. Entering the forest. In the draws, bunch grass and antelope brush. On the ridges, views to the far volcanoes. Once the sun was on our shoulders, but we have come west out of a land of bone and leather, stone, and the harsh divination of dark and light. When we reached the forests, low skies with leaf and needle deflected rain meticulously shredded our shadows. Stepping into the folds of malachite hemlock, nothing remained of our families wholly integrated into shade. Horizons end here in the duff where roots begin. Our bearings twist and seep, turning finally into rivers, flexible veins of air, insinuating branches. Give and recoil alone are required, for cedars, free of volition, thrive without clever footwork. Mist, haze, spores, moist pollen flecks bloom and eddy in these groves. Their near motionless interiors, the seed of all cathedrals. Among the thickets and sober columns, unconsciously brushing our intentions aside, even the wind sometimes drops to its knees. And of course, the forests, as we well know, are composed of trees. This first poem on this broadside was inspired by a forest canopy researcher and pioneer, Nalini Nadkarni, who would remind her audiences that trees are animate beings, not static sculptures, despite the fact that we often forget that. The tree as verb, which has this epigram, or epigraph rather. The true formula for thought is the cherry tree is all that it does. That's Ernest Fenollosa. The tree is verb. Seed, swell, press and push, sprout, bud, curl, unfurl, quicken, ripen, and dispense, remain. Blotch, ferment, rot, and mushroom, germinate. Probe, grope, root, draw in, draw up, dole out, allot, assimilate, respire, reconstitute, release. Senesce. Reach, brace, resist, avoid, deflect, split, notch, rustle, shake, bend and shimmy. Occupy. Cover, mask, obscure, protect, enclose, and hide, tolerate, support, feed, shade, harbor, and disguise. Stand, sketch out, stretch out, fork, reach, branch, divide, incline, and sway. Reclaim, endure, and burn, return. Leaf out, green up, synthesize, digest, night quiver, yellow, wilt and wither, absciss and collapse to root and rise. And a short poem, bottom there, going to the pith, inside out. Trees are our lungs turned inside out, and inhale our visible chilled breath. Our lungs are trees turned inside out, and inhale their clear exhalations. So this might be a good point to recall Michael Connor's poem and all of the, substantial losses of habitat and species that have occurred over the past 50 years, 100 years, 200 years, even a millennium. All that's been lost, and ask ourselves the question, what might we do? How might we respond? A difficult question. This last portion mentioned some possible responses. I'm sure seem inadequate, but they are what I have. And some of them are simply attitude shifts. One emotional response would be gratitude. And this poem gets at that. Forest Breakfast. H.J. Andrews' Experimental Forest, 4th of November, 2013. It will be fall in the Douglas fir forests. Gather chanterelles. Dry these on the counter overnight and brush them clean of fir needles and forest soil. Chop 1 clove of garlic, a bit of onion, 3 large chanterelles. They cover the pan 1/4 inch deep. They will shrink. Saute these almost dry, just a dab of butter to get the onion and garlic sizzling. In a second pan, scramble 2 eggs, half a tomato diced, a splash of olive oil, and just enough almond milk. Once the mushroom mixture is cooked down golden to the odor of a Sicilian kitchen with Mount Etna at the window, add it to the scramble. Sprinkle with very little salt, pepper to taste. Cook in a well-cured cast iron skillet, stirring time to time with a wooden spatula. Toast lightly 2 pieces hand-sliced of an intriguing bread. I have chosen an apricot, walnut, and date sourdough from Mud Bay's Blue Heron Bakery. Completed, heap the scramble on the toast, eat it warm, slowly, attentively, thankful for the forest. And a very different response, awe, which can border on fear, and has bordered on fear. This poem from a fierce and erratic night wind east of Steens Mountain some years back. It's called To the One We Cannot See, Whose Name We Must Not Speak. Facing playa and bleak stones, we hear no singer but the she-hoodlum wind set loose to shape and please herself. Tanked on a dying sun and rimrock nightfall, she hisses and whirls. Her porous hugs and hip bumps sap us and kill each struck match but the last. She leaps decades, lurches cross sagelands to parch and batter camps and ranches with winters too bleak and nights too black. Later, a ghost wrapped deep into her cups, she stumbles into camp without a cane, tripping over pitched tents, slip-knotted stays, stakes, stacked juniper spolt, and sage stems to sit down hard on our little fire in its iron half barrel, flattening its guttering flames to spark, a rude guffaw lacking consonants, while beyond this speck of night fire and whiskey, neat, thickened clouds eat up the very universe. The final poem's reading will be unadorned by literal images, but another strategy is simply, and it's not that simple, paying attention, or what Gary Snyder says here, which is out of the practice of the wild. Another joy is finally sitting down to have coffee with a friend. The wild requires that we learn the terrain, nod to the plants and animals and birds, ford the streams, cross the ridges, and tell a good story when we get back home. So here's a story, conversation among old folks. Common Ground Farm, outskirts, Olympia, Washington, 5th of September, 2012. When I arrived, bringing a book on easing bodily pains, Greg sat at the table holding a diminutive, bedraggled bat tucked in his left hand. With his right, he fed her chicken fat on a toothpick. And in the bat's enthusiasms, the fat proved better even than mealworms. She was ravenous, worked her fanged mouth wide, reached with a wing to pull the fat-dabbed toothpick in whenever it withdrew. Famished for having been trapped mistakenly the night before on flypaper, then rescued and unglued, no one knew if she'd eaten the trapped flies. Talk wandered then, from bats to the glittering chitin in their guano, swifts stalling over chimney roosts, falcons clued to that, and aircraft crashing having lost the horizon in Antarctica. Nancy plucked chickens with her whack, severing thigh from drumstick, while Julie examined books to size the absent swifts. And for a long, long moment, no one's body ached. And then there's overpopulation, which is a tough one. Poem is called Against Perpetual Fertility. Once at small fires, we were cold, huddled under the single blanket of the sky. Now at 7, this year nearly 8, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0 of us. We pile up and witless pile on the damp, transparent blankets of burned coal and crude, sweating back to mounds of salt under the clear, relentless lens of heaven. And another thing useful to recognize and to deal with cycles and making praise and making friends with the decay and regrowth. Slough, decay, and the odor of soil. Log decomposition research site, Blue River drainage, Oregon Cascades. Trunks, once poised and upright, collapse toward a 2-century graduation into beetle and vapor, moss, conch, and seedbed. their bowls intermittently chiseled by woodpeckers uncoiling their barbed tongues and probing the grub-etched galleries within. Hibernacula, lucent bark, sap and heartwood riddled with crawlways where ants stalk wood mining fungi. When inexorable ant-infesting mycelia reciprocate, the odor of must, cedar disintegrating through pungency to pulp and soil, the plush, ripe scent of continuous integration. What seemed solid stains and softens decade by decade, to be torn apart by bears after ants. The flavor on their tongues, that of dull sparks. All is relentlessly hollowed, grain by grain, cell by cell, into sponge and grub dust, salamander refuge, slug haven, frog shelter, and moss, all deepening to opulent, pre-ultimate humus and duff. And we do what we can to preserve and enhance habitat. One of our choices has been to support the local land trust with both donations and volunteer efforts. This poem comes from a volunteer effort with the Capital Land Trust, cleaning up an abandoned camp in a forest near Evergreen State College. Found in a homeless camp. Among the 43 contractor bags full of debris, weight exceeding 1 ton, materials from what were once a dwelling in a cedar tree, and a 15-foot diameter teepee bound together with insulation stripped from copper wire. Loads of visqueen and a pink plush orangutan, a rosary, a hand-sized wooden crucifix, several t-shirts displaying skulls and neon graphics, a Bible, a book of odd science, prescription meds and a debit card, a well and handcrafted wooden case for hand rolls and a lighter, 1 empty gallon of Carlo Rossi and a spent 2-liter bottle of Australian yellowtail, multiple malt liquor cans, a bong of aged weed, 1 grunge guitar effects box, which as it turns out, still functions. 1 empty can of watermelon flavored Four Loko, 12% alcohol. A checkered pendant bearing a Maltese cross and a live to ride, ride to live logo. A mattress on which a long poem has been inscribed in indelible marker. A small bag of coins from Hong Kong, India, Italy, Great Britain, Spain, France, Canada, and Mexico. A token for a bridge in Vancouver, British Columbia. Jewelry wire, beads, many skateboard wheels and 1 wheelless board. Waterlogged coats, heavy-duty rain pants, a hand-drawn sign saying please help. A small signal mirror silvered on both sides. Several cast aluminum boat fittings, shoes, cookbook from a famous Atlanta restaurant, condoms, unused. A wrecked Coleman lantern, an afro pick, a fluorescent orange dog chain, a soggy sleeping bag, a leather belt, CDs featuring Jackson Browne, Steve Martin, and Lou Reed. And finally, the last poem. Perhaps we can always turn to a bit of self-deprecating humor. Talk. It's a poem for Nigel, Anne, Jeanette, Greg, Gail, Larry, and Cedar. We were drinking tequila. There was a banjo in the corner of the room. Nigel said, well, we, and by that he meant Anne and himself, got this room once, reserved it at a distance in a resort city. We got there and the rooms, they were all done up in black velvet. We got out of there fast, forfeited our deposit. But then the next room, it was filled with millipedes. That turned talk to rooms that William Burroughs would have shunned. 6 layers of stained avocado wall paint and an armed night guard. And cockroaches, how at least one will always stand fast against the light. Then to a rainforest cabin where pack rats scurry half the night. Across the cook stove, plastic-covered mattresses, your bare chest. To which Nigel mused, I was sitting once on this beach at a Florida key watching the sun go down, and this rat sidled over, leans up against me, a minute or so anyway. He's watching the sunset too, I guess. And Anne, a legitimate biologist, I swear, she vouched for this. Thank you, and we'll do our best.
Thank you so much, Bill. That was lovely. And thank you for sharing those images too. This is the time at which we can now invite folks to ask questions, or you can put questions in the chat. Or if you want to, you can, I think you might have the option to raise your hand if you want to raise your hand and speak out loud and ask Bill a question out loud, or just say something to the room. Yeah, we have just a few minutes left, so now is your chance. I think there are several people in the audience who know you, Bill, because they have your same last name.
They may still remember me, yes.
Well, just as a reminder, as people are thinking of all those burning questions that they have or comments they want to make, in the chat, I'm putting the link to the North Cascades Institute's website that Christian mentioned earlier, where you can find out all the wonderful programming that they're doing. I'm so glad to hear that they are able to start opening up in increments like we're all trying to do and stay safe. So let's see. Mary Ellen says, great to hear you read your poems aloud. She says the photos are superb. Did you take all of those photos, Bill?
Well, I borrowed some of them from the internet, but probably 90% of them.
Okay. All right. And Nicole says, thank you for sharing. I just recently started writing poetry for the first time, and listening to your poetry is very inspiring.
Thank you.
And Jean says, thank you, Bill. This was wonderful and so evocative. In a word, splendid. And just all kinds of accolades. Yeah, all kinds of lovely accolades in the chat for you. Very nice to hear you read, Bill. Love this reading, Bill. Thanks so much. No questions, just buckets of gratitude and admiration. This reading and talk is a significant event in the world of Cascadian poetry and eco-poetry. I'm so glad to see it has been recorded. I'll be sharing this with students. Thank you, Derek.
Oh, wow.
Yes, this event will be available on YouTube. Yes, Greg.
Can I ask a question direct?
Please.
Hey, Bill, great reading. Thank you. Thanks. Great to hear the Float House poem and also the wind coming off the mountain. I think I was there with you for that one. So you also have many travel poems in your book, of course, and you didn't get into those tonight particularly, but being home so much this year, do you have much writing coming out of the Green Cove Creek area where you live?
This hasn't been so much of a writing year as a trying to pull the book together year, but Christian gave me a couple of assignments. I always respond to assignments, even when it's hard to come up with them on my own. So recorded one of Robert Sun's poems, which was posted by NCI, and a blog post. I'm trying to think. Yeah, there have been a couple, but I can't. They're not coming to mind. Really, it's more and more photography this year.
Mhm. Cool.
Okay, Kathy, would you like to ask your questions of Bill?
Yes, thanks. Bill, a couple questions I have. I know with visual artists, at one point they have to put the paintbrush down and just consider it a finished product. So how do you know when you have finished a poem and you have problems like leaving it alone? Do you ever revisit it after 5 years, or once it's published, then it's finished?
I'm trying to remember who it was that said, the way you know a poem is done is when you're tired of it, essentially, or at least you're tired of fiddling with it. You know, coming back to the poems, it seems I always find something to tweak, particularly when, in this case, putting the book together, and in addition to getting them in order, going through them with sort of the kind of attention that you need to go through them multiple times, in proofing and fitting them together. It seems like there's always something that can be improved, or it seems like there are improvements at the time. Probably about half the time, you come back another 6 months later, change it back to the way it was. But I really don't think of any of these as completely done. And in fact, even with past books, I haven't, because this is the first reading from this book, I haven't done that so much this time, but I'll even change the poem on the written page or on the printed page. Reading them makes a lot of difference sometimes, and sometimes for the first time you realize that the rhythm's not quite right, or a line break here or there would improve it. So I don't know that that's a succinct answer to your question, but it's what comes to mind.
Thank you.
Sure.
That's a great question, Kathy. I wonder the same thing. I wonder that with poetry, but also just I frequently ask that of authors. How do you know when you're done? So thanks for answering that, Bill, as best you can. I like that answer. Sometimes you're just never done. I am putting.
I think you're gone, Claire. You're muted.
Thank you. At least I wasn't coughing like I was in the introduction. I apologize for that, everyone.
No, I hope that's gone away.
Yeah, it just was a little tickle in my throat that just decided to happen right at the most inopportune moment that it could. So Christian has put links to the North Cascades Institute, specifically to their programs, in the chat. I have also put the link to the Village Books website, which will take you directly to the page where you can purchase this lovely book. So I encourage everyone to do that. And I also want to thank everyone for coming tonight. This has been a pleasure. If anyone has any final questions, now is your chance. I want to remind you that we have one final great poetry reading for the Nature of Writing series in April, and it's next Tuesday, April 27th at 6 p.m. We're going to welcome Kim Stafford. So I have a feeling that a lot of people in this room would be also interested in that event as well. So, Bill, do you have any parting words for our guests this evening?
Just that I'm very appreciative of everybody who showed up. Thanks much for sharing your time. And it's great to see some faces that I haven't seen animated since before COVID, I think.
Yes. Well, thank you all. Thank you all for coming this evening. And this event has been recorded. It will be on our YouTube channel, so you can share it. Anyone who didn't get to make it tonight will be able to watch it. So I think that with that, we can say good night. Be well, everyone, and thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.